All right, so the elders have given me permission to field questions and to interact with you guys, and so probably what I'll do is I'll just start talking about a little bit of the background of my family's journey and our experience in Sierra Leone. However, I would love nothing more than just to be interrupted left and right with hands and be able to ask maybe more questions. This is our life. We've lived there for 5 years. I have more material, more things to say than I have time to say it. And so that means I don't really know what specifically all to share and include. So if you guys can help guide me and maybe ask more details or ask more questions or ask for clarification, that would be just wonderful. And so don't feel bad at all about that. That would actually be a blessing to me. So me, my wife, and our 4 girls. So, one's relatively new, I guess. So when do you really start counting them, right? And so we actually don't have a family photo yet. So this is an older family photo. Maybe the other one's in there somewhere. I don't know. And so this first photo is when we first touched down in Sierra Leone on October 2nd, 2020. You can kind of date the photo a little bit by looking at the mask that we're wearing, right? And that time we just moved with our then 1-year-old daughter, Eden, and since then we've had 3 other kids. And so we spent the last 5 years of our life living abroad in the country of Sierra Leone. And I'll share a little bit more about that, but first let me a little bit of background here. This photo was taken, I'm not even sure when. I was like 14, 15, 16 years old. I went to a young men's Bible camp in North Alabama. And the state of my life when I first went to that camp was nothing entirely noble at all. I was kind of a goof in a lot of different ways. I really didn't have an idea of what it meant to be a follower of Jesus. I had just recently been baptized prior to going to this camp, but I was one of those Christians, and hopefully you never met one of these, that just left their Bible at church because I was convinced as a 15-year-old that's the only place I needed it. And so I went to this Bible camp, and I started hearing about what it meant to be a true disciple of Christ, and I was in these Bible classes every day, and was just, my eyes were opened to what it meant to be an authentic Christian. However, part of during this week, we would gather every day after lunch, and Sewell Hall, the kind of organizer of this camp, he would invite a man who had done preaching over abroad to come give a report about preaching overseas or living abroad and for the purpose of spreading the gospel. And so I remember sitting in this bleacher area here, and this is North Alabama. And it is right around 1, 2 p.m. It's hot. And I remember just having a hard time keeping my eyes open. I was hearing these things, and I was wasn't really compelled by it. It was kind of my least favorite part of camp. However, fast forward a couple days, I'm on my way back home. My dad's picking me up, and I remember being in the passenger side. My dad's driving me back to Indiana. And I did something that day. I opened my notebook, and I wrote down daily goals. Bible reading, 15 minutes per day. And that was by far much more than I'd ever read the Bible before, and that kind of would require me to make sure I brought my Bible with me from church. And I did, and I kept up with that. Every day that year, I read my Bible, every day. And so I came back the next year, and this was a slightly different Dan, someone who throughout an entire year, and by the way, that wasn't a very easy task of mine. There's several months. Those first several months, the first book, there was some teacher at the camp. I can't remember who he was, because I might want to call him and let's let him know this story. But he told me his favorite book of the Bible, this old preacher, was the book of Leviticus. And so I thought, well, of course, if I'm going to start reading the Bible, here's this really great Christian who says his favorite book of the Bible was Leviticus. So of course, that's where I'm going to start. And oof, those are tough read. And I got so discouraged, because I'd read for my 15 minutes, and I closed my Bible, and I wouldn't even remember what I'd read. You relate to that? Maybe the first time kind of getting, I get so discouraged. But after about 3 months of really not getting much out of it. I started understanding more about it, seeing connections, seeing how things fit together, feeling like I was able to really get. And so I came back to camp after that goal was accomplished. And the same routine. Sewell Hall didn't change his daily schedule very much during those times. And after lunch, the same hot North Alabama sun beating down on that shelter there. Same thing. Some guys would come up and they'd talk about the gospel being preached in faraway places in West Africa, East Africa, Northeast Asia, Eastern Europe, South America. Only something was different this time. I was sitting there in the bleachers, hearing about what the gospel was doing in the lives of these people, and I just started crying. And I was confused by it. I'm an emotionally complicated teenager going through puberty and all that stuff. What's going on here? And I remember going back in my bunk and just being so confused. What's happening? And I can't stop thinking about the faces of the pictures I'm seeing, and I come back the next day, and I just start bawling again. And I think I know what was happening. The Lord was changing my heart. Through me reading the Word every day, and even that next year, that next trip back to Indiana, I made a goal in my notebook, 30 minutes per day, and I doubled it, and doubled it a few times more in the coming years. And so from that time, I started developing a passion for preaching the gospel in difficult places. And I remember Sewell Hall seeing a group of us youngsters kind of getting fired up about preaching the gospel in these faraway places. And he kind of called us over to him, and he said, now fellas, teach at home before you preach at Rome, is what he said. And the advice that he was giving us is, don't think that somehow moving us overseas or moving abroad will somehow transform you into being some sort of evangelistic beast and some sort of super Christian or something like that. Be a servant of the Lord. Learn how to be a servant and a Christian and a faithful disciple of Christ where you are first. And then a door will open to do that overseas. And so I took that advice really seriously. And so I started really studying my Bible, learning it better, learning what it meant to becoming a servant of other people, working on my heart and removing anger and bitterness and some things that I struggled with when I was a teenager, and learning how to evangelize and teach until finally there was an open door for me to start doing that full-time fairly early on in life. And that was just a huge blessing for me. But I guess the point of me sharing this is sometimes people can glamorize the mission field a little bit and kind of seeing it as being this kind of like paradise. And sometimes they can glamorize those who do mission work or do like overseas preaching. And I just want to let you guys know, I was a total goofball and a total mess, but the Lord changed me. And we can all grow by God's grace to be things and do things that maybe we never thought we would be able to do, but by His grace are possible. I want to share a little bit about the country of Sierra Leone and to kind of give a context. And so this is not a tourism preview here. These are just aspects about the country of Sierra Leone that give a very direct influence to how we preach the gospel there. And so these details are pertinent to that. So if you didn't know where the country of Sierra Leone was, I'm not offended, all right? It's not a very prevalent country on the world scale. It's a fairly small, inconsequential country. Most of the time, the only time you've heard about it is when there's like natural disasters or when there's like political unrest or when there's disease or things like that. There was a 12-year civil war from like 1991 to 2002. There was Ebola. You ever hear about Ebola in Africa? A lot of times we think that happened all over Africa. It didn't. It mostly just happened in Sierra Leone. And it's the most circular country in the world, I guess, for what it's worth. We live in and moved to the city of Bo, where that star is. It's kind of centrally located there. It's not a very large country. I think it's about the same general square mileage as North Carolina. And so it takes about 7 hours to drive through the entire country. If you're taking a good road. If you're taking a poor one, it'll take you 20, 30 hours, as I've discovered a few times. And there are really 4 or 5 different major cities, and so we decided to move to the city of Bo, which is a pretty central location throughout the entire country. The majority of the citizens of this country are Muslim, and so about 75 to 80% Muslim. Although a lot of people, when they associate and think about a Muslim-dominated, area, a lot of ideas of violence and radicalism kind of come to mind. That's not the case in Sierra Leone. It's a very peaceful country now. So I kind of wonder if perhaps the bloody and the kind of violent nature of the Civil War that they experienced kind of frightened them away from violence. And so they're very peaceful. In many ways, I feel like some of the negative stigma regarding talking about religion is greater in the U.S. than it is in Sierra Leone. So I can have conversations with people in Sierra Leone all the time they were Muslim, about faith and about Jesus and about the truth and the Bible and things like that, and they're very welcoming of that sort of thing. And so, however, that meant that my approach and the types of arguments or the types of things I have to talk about with people is different than what I used to. I remember when I first started preaching, I mostly preached in Indiana, southern Indiana, and I learned to be very evangelistically effective in that area. And I learned what to say to people, maybe some approaches on how to talk to people. And then I moved to Boston, and my approach is a different culture over there. Very atheistic, very intellectual, very scholarly, and so a lot of the same conversation starters and things like that just wouldn't work over there. And so I had to change my approach. And then I moved to Sierra Leone, and again I had to start from scratch about how do you talk to people, how do you. And so it certainly was a process of learning what are the main, kind of topics to talk to people about. So most of it's going to be about the identity of Jesus. Who is Jesus really? So the Muslims would say he is a prophet of the Lord, but he is not God. He did not die on the cross. He did not rise from the dead. And so trying to focus on those key points is probably the direction that I would go. The common language in Sierra Leone, one of the challenges of teaching the gospel in Africa and many other places is there's so many different types of languages. So in Sierra Leone, there are probably 12 commonly spoken tribal languages. Imagine that. In the state of a country the size of North Carolina, there being 12 different divisions, or maybe you can call them counties, and every time you transfer from one county to another, you have to learn a different language to talk to them. So that's one of the challenges of teaching the gospel in countries in Africa. However, Sierra Leone is blessed with a common tongue, a common language. And so that's called the language of Creole, K-R-I-O, Creole. And so it's kind of a pidgin English. And so I made up my mind when we moved there, I was not going to teach any Bible classes or preach at all in English. I was only going to preach in Creole. And so I was hard at it, and so it takes time to learn. However, it has a lot of English vocabulary in it. So this is I threw up an example. This is John 3:16 in the Creole Bible. God so lek motoman that igi iwangren pikin we ilek, so that anybody will believe on him no go die, but he go get life will go day so te go. So you can probably, because you're familiar with John 3:16 in your English Bibles, probably pick up on what's being said. And so it's not entirely separate from English, and so we were able to pick it up. And so both me and my wife, all of our children are fluent in Creole and able to speak in Creole there. And that was really important to us, being able to speak to people without interpreter. Obviously, on short-term trips, you're not afforded oftentimes that ability, but when you're living there, being able to speak to someone in their own native language is really a huge blessing. One of the challenges of preaching in Sierra Leone is that the common tongue of Creole is not a written language. And you say, hey, Dan, wait a minute, that slide had Creole in it. Okay, technically, yes. And in fact, I even brought my Creole Bible. You can look at it afterwards. You can't take it. They don't print it anymore for reasons I'm going to describe. Even though technically, there is a Creole alphabet. Technically, there is a Creole Bible. Creole is an entirely spoken language. And so you're not taught to read it. You're not taught it in school. It's just a language that you speak orally, And so it is not a language that people learn. So that means that the majority of people, unless they've accomplished and achieved their school education to a higher degree than typical, most people will not know how to read at all. And so that means there's different methods that we need to use when teaching the gospel overseas in Sierra Leone. And so, for example, it would be a mistake to assume that because the people in Sierra Leone, by and large, have a very low reading comprehension, that they're not very intelligent. Imagine, you guys can answer this here. Imagine living your entire life without having any textbook or book to reference, without being able to take notes, without being able to look up things afterwards, Google them and reference them afterwards. What skill have you produced a lifetime without being able to utilize those skills? You've gotten really good at memorizing things. Really good at memorizing things. And so the people in Sierra Leone are so good at memorization. However, if we teach them, and if I teach them in a way that I'm used to teaching people here in the U.S., which is geared towards people who already know how to read and can read the text, then it's not going to play into their strengths. And so that means I need to be able to teach them in ways that will kind of key into their natural abilities. And so if you were to look at this picture here and I were to ask you, what age group do you think I'm teaching here? Maybe you'd assume, children. This is a children's class. In fact, maybe some of your children's classes have props like this that you guys use. This is a preacher study of the book of Nehemiah in the district of Kailaun. And so using visuals, using figures, using songs, using rhymes, using gestures, these sorts of things are the types of teaching tools that are really effective when teaching Sierra Leoneans because it really plays into their strengths to be able to learn. Another thing about Sierra Leone is there's a very heavy tribal kind of backbone to the country as far as tribal beliefs, tribal religion, and it's really kind of meshed in to even Christian beliefs and Islamic beliefs. And so there's a lot of practices amongst their kind of tribal beliefs that are old-fashioned, a lot of voodoo, witchcraft. There's an individual in every community called the Mori man, who's more or less like a witch doctor that you would go to. A good friend of mine, he lived in a very remote part of Sierra Leone, and his 6-year-old son died. And he's the only Christian, him and his family, in his village. And the day after his son died, his neighbors, the villagers, came to him and said, we knew he was going to die because we cursed your son. We put his spirit in a bird and we ate the bird, and that's why he died. And so that kind of practice and that kind of belief is very prevalent throughout Sierra Leone. Me and a coworker of mine were driving through this very desolate highway to get to this village to study with these people, and it was like a 7-hour ride on a motorcycle through this very desolate, very remote kind of motorcycle road. And we stopped to get some snacks, and another motorcycle taxi kind of pulled up beside us in one of these villages, and he says, where are you coming from? We got to know him a little bit, and he said, as you go, small, yeah, which is his way of saying, keep going, don't stop here. Because at night, there are cannibals in this village. And so even things like that, they won't eat for sustenance, but for certain tribal practices and different rituals and things like that, if their visitor comes by, that can happen from time to time. And so those kind of things still happen in Sierra Leone. Obviously, by the most part, if you are not looking for trouble won't find you. But that's something that we have to talk about a bit and talk about different societal practices regarding all that. And then I'm not sure how to put this into picture, but Sierra Leone is one of the more impoverished countries in the world. And I'm always hesitant to try to share that because I would like you all to appreciate and respect your brethren in Sierra Leone. And sometimes it's hard to respect the people you pity. And I don't want us to pity the people there. However, they are going through and have grown up in relatively, comparatively speaking, impoverished conditions. Now, I would say that any typical American that steps off the plane in Sierra Leone, your eyes will be this big for about 3 or 4 days as you just see people living in conditions you've never seen before, or very few of us have. But after you kind of get acclimated to this society, you realize, oh, wait a minute, they're not poor by their own standards, they're as poor by my standards. And you can kind of help work through some of that. And so, these are two church meeting houses. Compare that to the type of building we're in right now, and the type of conditions that we enjoy and almost come to expect. This is the reality in Sierra Leone. And so this is a question that I'll ask and kind of address here a little bit. What must be done when those who are most eager for the gospel live in the most impoverished of environments, while those who are most capable of teaching the gospel live in the most affluent of environments? That's kind of in some ways the predicament and the dilemma that is the reality. Is you find places like Sierra Leone, and I'm sure there are many other places like Sierra Leone around the world, people who are so hungry, so eager, but they're not an abundance of good teachers, capable teachers, to be able to respond to the needs and the wants and the desires of people to hear the truth. And so what needs to happen? My conviction that's led our family to make some hard choices is that the affluent need to go. Now, not all of them need to go, I'll say that. It's kind of like there's a similar great commission that's given in the beginning of Genesis. Jesus tells mankind to do what? To be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And we learn in the story of Babel that they refused to do so. But my conviction is that it wasn't wrong for everyone, that was living there in Babel. In fact, Babel was part of the whole earth that God intended to be filled, but it was wrong for everyone to stay there. Some people needed to leave Babel. And so similarly, some people need to be willing to leave the affluence, leave the abundance, to say goodbye and to learn to adjust to those things. And I think this is the gospel. If Jesus didn't believe in leaving the ivory palaces, as we sung about this morning, leaving security, leaving his home, then he never would have come to earth. Paul would never have gone on his preaching trips. We need people who are willing to leave the comforts and the families that they have, and that's central to the gospel. It's not just extra credit for some people. It's a requirement. The only way that we can accomplish God's will for mankind is if some people decide to do that. I don't know who it is. I can only make a decision for my family and for myself, and so that's what we've done. And so that decision requires a lot of adjusting. And it requires adjusting even simple things like how we wash our laundry. This is my wife. Multiple times every week for the past 5 years, this is how my wife washes laundry. And we wash it, she washes it by hand, except for when she's in the first trimester and the last trimester of being pregnant. She's been pregnant 3 times in Sierra Leone. I'm kind of wondering if she's asking for a break during those times when I have to take my turn washing her laundry during that time. It requires adjusting how you get groceries and what kind of groceries you can get. This is my wife going through the outdoor markets. That picture of her kind of wrapped with our oldest Eden. This is the catacomb that is the market. You enter this little area, and it's a maze you go into, and you find different things like that, kind of on tables and things like that. Yes, that is a lady's foot next to the cucumbers there. She's sitting on her bench selling cucumbers and lettuce. This is our version of a Walmart. This picture of the market over here. It's a little corner store. They call it a supermarket. It's probably the size of the HV room over here, just real small, where we can get some imported goods. It means adjusting when it comes to how you cook. For the first 2 years of us living in Sierra Leone, this is where my wife would make breakfast and make our one large meal of the day after that. Cooking over coals, outdoors. Even to this day, we don't have any oven, even though we recently, a couple years ago, purchased a fitting that goes on top of a propane tank so we can have some gas to cook on top of. It means adjusting our means of transportation. So my family, for the majority of the time that we've lived in Sierra Leone, we get around on motorcycle. Many of the roads are not capable of being able to take a vehicle. Even vehicles are very expensive over there, and so we just, when in Rome, we take our motorcycle everywhere, so we've had all 5 of our family members prior to this, the arrival of our new baby on the motorcycle all at once. This is a picture of me crossing a river on a hewn-out wood canoe with my motorcycle, trying to get to a village to have studies. This obviously requires sometimes us getting caught in a rainstorm, and having to pull off for 2 or 3 hours for the rains to be able to subside for us to be able to make our way home. I should warn people for this. If you're squeamish, look away. It means exposing ourselves to different critters and uncomfortable, wildlife that's there. I'll be quick about this one. I'll just move on. It means exposing ourselves to different types of illness and discomforts. We don't have the advantage that local Sierra Leoneans have when it comes to their natural immune system and their bodies being capable of handling some of the germs and some of the diseases that are over there. And so we get sick a lot. And the first 2 or 3 years that we were there, we were sick a lot. And there were so many times I'm just sitting in my living room just so dog sick, and I'm holding my kids in my arms, and they're sick, and just thinking, I didn't move here for this. This is the hard part. This is really tough. And so I could talk more about that if you want. It also meant us adjusting to language. As hard as the sickness, as hard as cooking over fire, as hard as washing laundry by hand, one of the hardest things is the language. And those of you who've learned a second language know some of the frustration that comes along with that. Especially Sewell Hall's advice he gave me. Preach at home before you preach at Rome. And so I took that advice really seriously. Do you know what that meant? I got really good at preaching at home. And then I moved to a place that way of teaching didn't work. And that language I spoke in didn't work over there. And people are asking me questions about the most important topics, the most important subjects in the universe. And all I want to do is be able to speak clearly and give them a clear answer. But the words, I can't find them. And I'm clumsy and I'm awkward with how I'm saying it. And I can't say it as clearly. And I just feel so incapable. And so it means also adjusting into what church means. So when we first moved to Sierra Leone for the first couple years, this was our meeting place. We met in between a house and a wall, and the tarp over top of us to protect us from the sun. And this is what our kids' class looks like. Just a mat on the ground and just sitting down there teaching the kids. And that tarp did not work as well as you think during the rainy season. And so we just all admitted, that we put our Bibles in plastic bags, and we sat there and just, worshiped the Lord and said the Bible as best we could, even during the rains and during the sunshine and during the heat and all those other things. And so the reason I'm sharing all of this is that this is what the gospel will call us to do in different ways. And this is what the gospel has called my family to be able to do, some of the adjustments and sacrifices that we've made. But I think each one of us here, if given the opportunity, could share a similar story of the types of ways the gospel has called you to abandon things that you used to do, that you used to enjoy, the things that you used to be a part of in order for the sake of the gospel and for the sake of other people. All right. So what are we doing in Sierra Leone? Any thoughts, any questions at this point? Yeah, go for it.
So you mentioned the literacy. Do y'all just read straight scripture a lot in order to help with memorization, more than you would have in Boston or Indiana?
For sure, yeah. And oftentimes we'll read multiple times. So my Bible classes, if it's a key scripture, a key text, I'll read it through once, read it through twice, teach the story, read it through again. So that kind of repetition is really, really important and really valuable over there.
You said that the language, is it impossible to find Bibles that are written in that language, or, are there translations that we could help fund?
Yeah, really good question. That's always the question. So people do not know how to read in Creole. And and same thing with their own tribal language that they've learned. That's also not a written language. That's commonly read. And so only those who have excelled in school, and probably the top 2%, have learned to read with, passing reading comprehension. And so that means that, and that's going to be English as what they've taught to read. And so really, the English Bible is what is used by those who are capable of reading over there. So, yes?
I mean, did I remember you said they rooted in Muslim religion?
Yes.
They grew over there converting them.
What's that?
So he's over there converting them?
Yes. Yeah. Well, so teaching the gospel to all man and making disciples of all creatures is our intention. So that meant that those who are following Christ but not following him correctly, those who are followers of Muhammad and the Quran, being able to talk to them about the truth and talking about who Jesus really is. So there's a disparity between who Jesus is to the Muslims and who Jesus is in the Bible. And so both those things cannot be in agreement. And so we have discussions about, all right, which one does the evidence point to as being the legitimate identity of Christ? Right. Yeah, that would be their position, is that Muhammad is a prophet. Yeah, and then Jesus is a prophet as well. Yeah.
So are you persecuted because of that with Muslims?
No. So there is openness for discussion, and so I have been invited.
And since you speak the language, your persuasiveness means a lot in the way you're able to persuade people.
Yeah, I wish it was more, but yes, certainly so. So I think when people understand that I have invested enough to learn the language, I've read the Quran, I've had countless conversations with people about this topic. Most people in Sierra Leone, they've not even read the Quran, and even if they've read the Quran, they've only read it in Arabic, which they're not taught the meaning of it, and so they've learned to recite it, and so they don't actually know the meaning of it, and so I will typically have a better understanding of the Quran than most Muslims I even talk to, and so I'm actually able to use some of that knowledge and some of that comprehension there to try to help them see more clearly. Yeah, good questions. Yeah, and I would say people in Sierra Leone are very humble towards outsiders, towards foreigners, towards each other. They're willing to hear someone else's opinion very easily, very eagerly. And so that gives you an open door in almost every situation. There are exceptions to that, obviously. All right, so what are we doing in Sierra Leone? One of the first things that we did that I noticed is we were worshiping with the brethren in Bo, and when it came time to sing, they passed around sacred selections, the English hymnal that had been shipped there by some Americans there, well-intentioned. Here's some hymnals. You got to learn how to, and we would sing the words of them. But the songs that we would sing out of that hymnal, I'm not trying to bash, they're very appropriate for an English-speaking context, but I think we can all agree that even some of the older hymns have older, more archaic language that are difficult for even some American audiences to be able to sing with comprehension, let alone audiences in Sierra Leone whose English is their third language. And even if there are a few men in the congregation that would know the meaning of those hymns, certainly not the children, and definitely not the women, who don't typically are not able to complete their education nearly as fully as the men are. And so after some thought, I decided to preach a sermon on 1 Corinthians 14, where Paul talks about the importance of edification in the assembly. Let all things be done for edification. And his point is that in order for edification to be achieved, understanding needs to be achieved in everything. Nothing should be done in confusion or in a way that's not understandable. And what are we doing when we're singing in English with an audience and with a group that only half or a third knows what we're singing about? That means not everyone is being edified, not everyone is singing with understanding or being encouraged by that. And so one of the leading men of the group, Pasawi, he stood up and just thanked me for the clarity of God's word and says, we will never again worship with English hymns. That statement was before we had very many Creole hymns. We had 4. And so we would, we told the whole group we want to be able to develop Creole hymns for us to be able to sing, so that all can participate in that. And at that time, we were still working on it, but that meant for several Sundays, we were singing the same 4 hymns again and again and again, 3 or 4 times in worship, just on repeat. But at least it was with understanding. And so since that time, we've all tried writing hymns and being able to even transcribe some hymns into Creole and things like that. And so now I think we have about 38 hymns in our homemade hymnal for the work there. And that's something that's been a blessing, not just to the church in Bow, but also other brethren that have been able to hear, edification in their own language, in their own tongue. It's been a blessing to them. It's also been really cool to be able to write hymns for the church you're a part of. That's been an interesting thing. We all know, the group here is different than any other group anywhere else. Maybe the things that you need to hear or the weaknesses or the encouragements that are needed here might be different. And so in Sierra Leone and the church in Bow, we knew exactly what the weaknesses of that church are. We knew exactly the types of things we need to be encouraged towards. And so we're actually able to write very specifically hymns regarding that to help us and develop us towards that. And then also we're spending a lot of time teaching and training local leaders. And so there's so many needs in Sierra Leone, and so it makes the most sense to me to be able to try to equip and train leading men, individuals who have a capability of being able to teach other people. If we just I just go one-on-one for everyone, but being able to teach teachers who are then able to teach other people might be the best way of being able to meet some of the needs at large. Yes?
Might be about to answer this, but how many locations do you preach at on Sundays?
Yeah, so anywhere from 2 to 3 congregations. So in Sierra Leone, because of the poverty, it's very common, even within a relatively small locale, for there to be multiple churches because people can't afford the transportation costs of being able to travel across town, And so maybe here in the U.S., if there's a locale that has tons and tons of churches, maybe sometimes you kind of scratch your head like, hey, why are there so many, Is there really a need for so many? In Sierra Leone, there is kind of a need for so many because there's not, there's a logistical issue with someone traveling far distance. And so a lot of times whenever there's just a small family or a few people converted within a neighborhood, there'll be kind of a small church started there, and then they'll invite their neighbors and they'll get kind of converted from there. So there's 3 different congregations really in the Bow area that I work pretty frequently with. And so that just means teaching a lot of the leaders, a lot of times spending time one-on-one with them or in small groups, teaching them about the Bible, teaching them how to study the Bible. One of the cool things that we've done is twice a year we kind of hold like a week-long Bible camp, I guess you can call it, a Bible retreat, where we just invite men from throughout the entire country to come join. And so me and Sean, the other American preacher there, spend the entire week from morning till evening just studying with these guys, studying with them again and again, through different things. The style we've kind of decided on was just teaching them about how to study the Bible. And so we kind of choose a different literary genre of the Bible and talk about how to study that particular style. So for example, like there's narrative, characters, places, events, things like that. How do you study narrative? And that approach is going to be different than how you study like Isaiah and Jeremiah. And that's going to be different than how you study the epistles, And so just being able to talk to them about how to study the Bible. And so we, talk with them about how to do that, and then we kind of, have exercises for them and them practicing how to do that so that they can then share that. This is a funny picture. It looks like Sean's teaching English class, but some of the part of teaching these men is understanding the difference between different like connector words, difference between with and through and therefore and by and if then and but, and so that if you don't have a good understanding of what those words mean and the difference between those words between those words, they're going to come up with a very different conclusion to some of those things. And then even teaching some denominational pastors and leaders. I've never had much open doors for doing that in the U.S. In Sierra Leone, there are open doors everywhere for me to teach religious leaders of community churches and denominational churches in Sierra Leone. Most of what they're hearing is very much ingrained in the prosperity gospel. That's a familiar term to you guys, this idea where African preachers will stand up and say, if you give on Sunday, if you give to my ministry, if you give to my hotline, then God will bless you. And by the end of this year, you'll get married, you'll have kids, you'll be healed, you'll travel, you'll have a house, all this kind of stuff. But it's very much very emotional and kind of rah-rah. And so being able to offer some of these men a different way, to be able to study and teach them with reason-based from the scriptures has led to, this man, his name's Solomon. I met him and we studied one-on-one, and after 2 studies, he says, I feel like I am Nicodemus. Am I a teacher of the law? Yet I do not know these things. And he was baptized the next day, and he said, Dan, I need you to come to my hometown. I have so many people who will want to hear this. And so this is a group of like 80 pastors and pastors' wives that he'd gathered for me to study with for a full week. And so there's opportunities not only with individuals, but then every individual I study with, there's an open door to everyone else that they talk to and study with. We spend a lot of time serving struggling churches. That word is defined in different ways. Some of them are struggling just with not being very strong in their faith or in doctrine. Some of them are struggling because of some controlling church leaders in their group, and so just spending a lot of time with small, struggling churches. This is the church in Bo that we are probably closest to. Some of my best friends are in this photo here. But then there's a lot of other small congregations in Banda Juma, in Coco Follet, in Bobogao. And these are all pictures of your brothers and sisters whom the Lord has been hard at work for many years, teaching them about the gospel, different places throughout all Sierra Leone, different nooks and crannies of different neighborhoods. You never would have thought there was a congregation of believers there. But these are all congregations that are not filled with an abundance of good, solid biblical teaching. And every time I leave one of these places, I'm like, I have to come back next week. I have to come back next week. But then, obviously, there's the hardship of being able to follow up and not being able to follow up with everyone. And so, with the abundance of demand for follow-up teaching with so many people, I had an idea to be able to start recording some videos online. And Sierra Leone, even though it's impoverished, more and more people are getting access to smartphones. Not everyone, and not even the majority of people, but the higher percentage of people are getting access to smartphones. And people have Facebook there. And so if you have a smartphone, you typically have Facebook. You don't have YouTube, you're not using Google, but you have Facebook. So, and so I thought, well, what if I started a Creo Bible study, Bible lesson Facebook page? And the thought is I would just record like 10 minutes or less Bible lessons where I could just, very simple Bible teaching. And then when I met individuals that I'm not able to study with, I could say, well, I'm not able to study with you right now because I'm so busy and I really want to. However, until I am able to, here's at least something that you can watch, something that you can engage with that could hopefully is a blessing to you. And so I started doing that, and within, the first, month or so of posting videos, I really had the expectation, maybe 30 views per video kind of thing. It kind of blew up. I'm not sure you can kind of see the viewership numbers there. I was getting about maybe 400 to 500,000 views per month, and getting anywhere from 80 to north of 100 private messages per day of people, thanking me for the content, but asking follow-up questions, asking to receive more teaching, asking, please come to study with me, please come to my village, please teach my family, please come to my church. And so what I intended to be something that could help the overflow of opportunity end up creating more opportunity. And thankfully, in spite of the overwhelming nature of this lead, it's really led to a lot of open doors. There is a man who came across this online content. His name is Joseph. That's him with his first harvests of cucumber. That's cucumber. That's really that big over there. And his name is Joseph, and he's a church pastor, church leader in the district of Koidu, of Kono. And so he invited me to come study with him. And I already knew some people in Koidu. It's like, all right, if I go there, I can study with him and in addition to some other people. And so I sat down with him, and every day for 3 or 4 hours, we'd study in the afternoon, and then he'd invite me in the evening to come preach at his congregation. And I agreed, not having any idea what to expect. And I got there, and I'm, they want you can't really see in this photo here. In the very back, you see those chairs next, and you probably can't see, it's probably too distant. There's like these really expensive sofa chairs in the back. And like, please sit here. And I'm like, no, I can't sit there, just awkward, I can't do it. I sat in the seat, and I'm sitting there, and they begin. And it's all this clamoring, jumping up and down, speaking in different, non-intelligible language and mumbo jumbo, and they're dancing and they're playing the instruments, and I'm just like, what am I doing here? But they invited me to come preach, and so I taught, and it said, please come back the next day. And the next day, people stood up, but they didn't dance. And the next day, the sheet went over the drums and the keyboard, and by the time I left, certainly they had more to learn from all that, but there was a transformation happening, a change kind of happening with some of that. And that week ended with Joseph, his wife, and a few members of the church being baptized in the river outside of town. And so this is an example of an individual who is teaching his church and reforming the congregation there. Little by little, there's still so much more they have to learn. I don't want to overstate the reality of it. But people who are humble to transformation and the change of the Word of God. Yeah. Very similar story with Aya. Aya is this handsome fellow in the yellow shirt here. He is actually from Koen, the same place, but he had been transferred by his head denomination, his general overseer, his bishop, to start a church in Bow, which is where I live. And so he said, messaged me on Facebook and said, Dan, does the Bible say anything about church planting? Because I'm gonna plant a church. And I said, I'd love to talk about that. And so he came, and we studied about what church is and what it isn't, and what it means to make disciples, and what it means to be a disciple. And shortly thereafter, he was baptized in the Sewa River there. And he's invited me multiple times, and I work very closely with Aya and the church that he's preaching for. So again, an example of someone who is taking the truth, sharing it with the members of that church, and they're beginning and far actually along the journey of reform and aligning their doctrine, their practices with the Word of God. And then there's Freetown. So I noticed on the statistics of that Facebook page that about 80% of people that are engaging in the online stuff are all living in Freetown. And I'm just getting so many requests, come to Freetown, teach us, come to Freetown. And so I decided to go there. And so I didn't have any leads. I've not spent much time in Freetown at all, but I went there, and I posted on the page saying, all right, I'm going to be at this place. I didn't even know where to hold a study. I messaged this one restaurant called Chicken Kingdom, of all places, and they said, oh yeah, we have this conference room upstairs. Go ahead, just use it, And so I go upstairs to Chicken Kingdom, and so I'm like an influencer. Come to Chicken Kingdom, and and so, and not knowing a single person would show up. And right on time, people started walking through the door. And, these individuals that I'd had conversations with, but didn't know their faces, didn't know, who they were. And so individuals like David, he's one of the farthest on the left there. He's a humble man who sees a lot of the corruption and the insincerity of a lot of Bible teachers in Freetown, in Sierra Leone. And he didn't want anything to do with that. And so when he saw just the simple approach that we're taking to reading the Bible, talking about the kingdom of God, our very last day in Freetown ended with him giving a hug and then running out the door because he was ashamed of him crying from our departure. This individual here is, his name is God's Will with the red hat. strange name maybe. In Sierra Leone, if you were born into a Muslim household, you were given a very typical Muslim name. And when he decided he didn't want to be a Muslim anymore, he wanted to be a Christian, he had to think of a new name. And in his understanding, in his view, I think God came to change our lives, not just our name. And so I don't teach that, but that's what he wanted to do. And so his new name that he wanted was God's Will. And so I studied with God's Will so much. I had studies in 2 different places, teaching the same material, and he insisted every day on going with me to both places because he wanted to hear it twice. At the end of that week, it might look like I'm walking into the distance by myself. I'm not. That's me and God's Will walking into the ocean at the beach in Freetown. And you maybe not be able to see very much of God's Will in this photo, but you might be able to see his smile. A smile that I'm sure is relatable to a lot of us. And so God's Will, along with some of the other people from Freetown, have actually visited me in Bo for studies. They've been able to connect with the brethren in Bo and are excited about being able to continue working with them in Freetown, Lord willing, in a few months. Try to go through this more briefly here. Another study in Freetown, if you thought Chicken Kingdom was a peculiar name, this neighborhood, they said, Dan, we know you have studies over there. It's too far for us. It's such a big town. Please come over here. And I said, where are you located? Devil's Hole is, if there was a need for a Bible study in a certain neighborhood, perhaps Devil's Hole would be the one. I never got a clear answer for why it's called Devil's Hole, but it's Devil's Hole. And so we had daily studies there, and you can see God's Will in the chair there because he's come for round 2 of the same the same material there. And then in addition to that, there are also so many other opportunities. This is some men who are visiting Sierra Leone from the U.S. on a short-term trip that also assisted some contacts and everything. I'll go through this quickly here, and then you guys can ask a few questions here before we close. Building up marriages. The Civil War in Sierra Leone devastated so many families. It's been said to us regarding the Civil War that imagine the effects of a generation when all the parents got killed. What kind of husbands would those individuals who grew up without fathers become? What kind of wives? What kind of marriages would be the result of that? And then that's what it's like in Sierra Leone. And so we have weekly studies where we invite couples and individuals who are married. We have workshops and things like that, talking about what it means to be a godly wife, a godly husband, and do that in a way that serves the Lord. I'm trying to teach with a goal to be replicated. And so one of the challenges in Sierra Leone is when I teach, I want to teach in a way that those I'm teaching can teach other people. That makes sense, right? And so that means, how do I teach in a way that someone who doesn't know how to read can still teach what they've learned? Has been a question. And so I'm trying to do that. And so this is me teaching through Matthew. And so I supply everyone who wants to try to teach their neighbors these visuals. And this is from Matthew chapter 3 with John the Baptist and talking about who he was and having these different visuals there to help them understand the story that they can then share that story with their neighbors. And people can take that home with them and use that. Teaching and training future mountain walkers. I don't have much time to expound upon why I talk about that. In Isaiah 52, that's quoted in Romans 10, this idea of the beautiful feet of those who spread the good news. In Isaiah 52, it's described the type of geography, the type of landscape that those beautiful feet are walking on. How beautiful on the mountains are those who bring the good news. And I think that maybe implies that the people who have and possess these beautiful feet are walking on landscapes that are not easy to walk on. Not the paved pavements or the sidewalks or the freshly cut lawns, but mountains. And you imagine, first of all, how disgusting those people's feet would be. He spent all day walking on mountains. Anyway, so I'm passionate about talking to young men who might be interested in doing that sort of work one day in whatever capacity. And so I'm very busy in Sierra Leone, and I'm typically somewhat reluctant to accept people visiting us simply because it can distract from the work and take me away from so many things. However, the one type of person that I've never said no to yet is a young man or some young people that want to go there and they're very seriously thinking about perhaps devoting their life to that or being serviceable in that particular field later on in life. And I've not learned everything there is to learn. I still feel clumsy and awkward in this work, but I've learned some things, and I've gathered a lot of information and a lot of instruction from other older, wiser men than me, and so I'm eager to be able to share that with some other young men. And then just learning and growing through a lot of hardship. This is a story. And then, yeah. I guess one thing that I'll share here is one sentiment, and it's understandable, we're not upset at it, but that we receive sometimes when we visit brethren in the U.S. is, we're so, sympathetic for you guys living abroad. We're sorry, it must be really hard there, and they feel kind of sorry for us. And I think about all the things that we've learned in our 5 years of living abroad, and I think about how closer we are to the Lord and how much our faith has grown, how much we've been stretched, and I say, wow, I feel sorry for you. I've had a front row seat to what the Lord's done in many different ways, and I wouldn't take it back for anything. And no amount of hand washing is worth not benefiting from the blessings here. And so there have been some hard times, certainly. There have been times of sickness and illness, and some times of friends going through tragedy and through heartbreak. But there's a lot of blessings that come along with those types of things. All right, what are some thoughts or questions or anything you want me to maybe expand more about, Barry?
Just wondered what would be the most common or typical teaching that you have to correct or that you have to work on?
Yeah. So I definitely think the prosperity gospel kind of is something that's very common over there. So them thinking and being told that if your faith is strong and if you serve the Lord, then the Lord will promise you blessing and happiness and joy. And in a society that is filled with a lot of discomfort and a lot of hardship, that teaching takes root. Part of me, I don't understand it, because if that really was the case, then you'd think after a generation everyone would be wealthy and everyone would be happy, but it's not. So either people are not truly faithful, or that kind of teaching is ludicrous. And so trying to teach them that the riches that we have in Christ are far beyond what these Bible peddlers are offering them, and helping them overcome some mistakes or some speed bumps in their faith because of that. And so another thing is there's a lot of greed associated with a lot of the churches. There's an individual greed and lust, I would say, are motivators for a lot of church leaders and church pastors. And you imagine when someone's teaching something from a motive of pride or power or control or greed or sensuality, if he taught that doctrine to a group of people that were able to understand and read the Bible, they can call him out. But if he's able to teach that to a group that because of their lack of reading comprehension, they're not able to. For example, there's a brother in Christ now, but prior to him joining the Lord's people, he wanted to be baptized. And so he lived in a neighborhood, and the nearest church was down the road. He walked to that church, and he said, I want to be baptized. And they said, wonderful, so glad to baptize you. That'll be 500 Leones. They would charge money for baptism. There was a Muslim neighbor of ours who wanted to become a Christian, and so she was interested and open about becoming a Christian, converting to the Christian faith or whatever. And so the nearest church that she went to, she walked in and she joined the church, and after the services, the pastor said, oh, are you, I know you're a Muslim, I want to become a Christian. Ah, perfect. Come into my office, undress, and I'll ceremoniously wash you. Just things like that. Most of us that know anything about the Bible would say that's obviously so despicably wrong. But teachers like that are allowed to gain great followings because the people they're talking to are ignorant. And so there's a need to be able to address those types of very simple things. I don't get asked that hard of questions in Sierra Leone. There's the simplest question, the simplest, solutions, simplest scriptures, just very clear in the text, very clear in God's word that people there are just hungry for and don't have. All right. Any other thoughts? Any other questions? Always more to say, but I've talked for a while. Yeah.
And I know we talked about this, but for the benefit of those who haven't.
Sure.
How many classes a day do you teach?
Yeah, so it's been a mental and emotional journey for me to learn how to navigate my responsibilities in an environment where there is more demand than I have time for. And so there's certainly been times where I've taken too many classes per day, and therefore other parts of my life have suffered because of that. So at this point in time, my maximum amount of classes that I'm able to teach is 4 per day. However, there's a significant demand for more than that, but it's in order for me to keep my own preparation for studies, my own devotion to the Lord, and my responsibilities as a father and a husband, it needs a limit at that. So.
4 per day, 6 days a week.
Yeah.
Sundays, work with 3 different congregations. That's a typical week. Daylight hours.
Yeah. And then also trying to teach and record videos for online stuff in addition to some of those things and respond to correspondence. And so, obviously some days are slower, some days are faster. You know, there's obviously, as we all know, there's no such thing as a constant routine. Things come up and kids get sick or whatever, you know, and so we have to, alter courses sometimes during that, but I would say that's pretty typical. What does my wife do? She's the hero of this all. So before we moved to Sierra Leone, we were told by many couples who had lived overseas, it's typically harder for the women than it is for the men. And that's, by and large, I do the same thing there I did here. I just teach the Bible all day long, But all those photos of the adjustments we need to make, there's a reason why Sonia's in almost all of those, because her life is by far the more challenged one. And so household chores take longer. Washing laundry by hand multiple times a week, going to the market. We have a little mini fridge, is as much as electricity that we're able to have over there, and so she goes to the market pretty often to be able to, refill that. She cooks over using means that take longer to cook meals and things like that. She is now, 3 kids back in Sierra Leone, but 4 we'll be returning with, and so watching the kids and homeschooling them in addition to that. But she is equally passionate about teaching, and so she teaches a lot of the women in Sierra Leone. For a while, I thought the women in Sierra Leone were just uninterested, because sometimes I would teach women's classes, because I'd be put in that position. I'd go to a neighborhood, there'd be a bunch of women, and so I'd teach, and like, these ladies aren't really interested. And then Sonia would go there, and there would be tons of discussion, tons of questions. They'd be like, oh, okay. And so there is a receptiveness that a woman teaching other women is by far more effective over there. And so there are several times in the week where I watch the kids. Sonia goes and teaches classes and teaching studies with women in there. And even women will come to our house quite frequently for studies with Sonia. And so she does as much of that as she can. She does more than that. I couldn't express all of it. Yes. Yeah, so Sean and Abby Reich moved with us in 2020. And so they've lived there the same amount of time, the past 8 years. So they live in Bo with us. So they are preparing to leave Sierra Leone in about 6 months. And so they'll be leaving the country and relocating to Louisville, Kentucky for several years. And so as far as the future for us, Lord willing, in a few months, we'll be moving to the city of Freetown. One of the reasons for that is because of all the contacts I'm getting through some of the online stuff. Being able to follow up on the opportunities there will be hopefully a blessed endeavor. And another couple from the U.S. are agreeing to move with us to Freetown. We didn't expect that. That's a huge blessing to us, and so we're thankful to have extra hands to be able to meet some of the needs.
Not having a written language and how hard it is to learn a different language. do you think that's very common? It's just almost incomprehensible. I cannot understand how difficult it would be to teach in depth with that. But is that throughout Africa? Is there so many places in the world that, of course, it's just hard to understand?
I've not been everywhere, so I can only speak for Sierra Leone. It is hard in Sierra Leone. It is hard. My style of teaching here in the U.S. is I find someone who wants to study the Bible with me, open your Bible to Luke, read verses 1 through 4. I ask them questions about what's in the text. They find their answers in the text, and I tell them, hey, read this text before next time we meet. Maybe think about these questions. That style of teaching is not as effective over there, and so it's taken a lot of experimentation and a lot of, for us to learn how to teach more effectively over there, and we're always trying to figure out how to do that better. But yeah, it is a legitimate issue. All right, thank you guys so much for you guys' kind of attention. I would love to talk about this more, and so anyone who has questions afterwards or whatever, feel free just to ask away. But thank you for your interest in the kingdom work in Sierra Leone. Thank you for your prayers, your encouragement. It's certainly been a blessing to me, and I'm going to share that encouragement with my family. Apparently there was a misnomer that I left my recently postpartum wife in Sierra Leone with 4 kids. No. She's in Indiana. She's not in Sierra Leone, so I want to settle that one right there. She's doing just fine. In Indiana, she's just resting and recovering there. I did not leave my wife over there. But if there's any way that we can be of encouragement to anyone here, the elders, the brethren here, make that known as we stand and sing this final song.